Sounds good.
Hey there, soccer fans. Welcome back to the Sons of a Pitch, an American soccer podcast. As we continue our team previews looking ahead to the 2020 MLS season, we are very happy to be joined by Joseph Samelson of the RapidsRepublic.com, an independent supporters blog that Joseph has started himself. Joseph, I've looked at your blog, I've looked at some of your articles, and you definitely know what you're talking about, man. So thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, I appreciate you so much for inviting me on. I'm happy to talk about the Rapids anytime. I can talk anybody's ear off of about soccer anytime I get the chance. So I'm very happy to discuss it with you guys.
Well, we were just talking a little bit offline about kind of how you came to be a Rapids fan and writer. So why don't you give a little recap to our listeners so they know who you are and what you're all about?
Sure. So I played soccer my entire life. It's just been a sport I've always been around, always had an interest in. But until about 5-6 years ago, I didn't really have a proper local team to support because I lived in pretty rural southern states for most of my life. And when I moved to Colorado, went all in on the Rapids. And after watching them for, long enough, I just sort of got the itch to start writing again because it was something I did a lot in college and doesn't really give me too many. My current job doesn't really give me a lot of options to do sort of like creative writing. So started the Rapids Republic as a sort of way to, keep myself fresh in the writing game and just keep my just write more about soccer because I always feel like there's more to say than what's being said. And I'm very happy that MLS is rapidly increasing in popularity, and now we're getting more and more people, including on this podcast, talking about the league. So that was just the goal, and that's where we are now. That brings us to here.
That's awesome, and that's exactly kind of our position and where we came from too. I'm a lawyer, Mike's an accountant, so this is our creative outlet, and yeah, our goal here is to continue to grow the conversation, to grow the sport through conversation, and so we're happy that you're here to help us out. For our listeners, you know the format of our team previews here. We're going to look at players in, players out. We're going to look at the DPs, some of the potential breakout youngsters, maybe some projected lineups, and then just kind of give the floor and the ceiling of how everything shakes out for the Rapids. So, Mike, you're here as well, of course. Last but not least, the introduction here for my fellow host and good friend. So, Mike, why don't you start us off with some roster talk here with the Rapids, and then we can get Joseph's take on everything else as well.
All right. So, yeah, lots of movement in and out for the Rapids. A lot of good moves in from what I'm seeing. Some of the players in, we've got Austin Trusty, the trade from Philadelphia Union. Drew Moore, former TFC guy, came back, was a former Colorado guy, and then went to TFC, and now is back with Colorado through.
And has his original number too.
Nice.
They gave him number 3, which is what he was wearing right before he left to TFC, and now that's what he's wearing in preseason at least. So hoping he keeps it.
There you go.
Nice.
Another former TFC guy, Nicolas Benazet, the midfielder, on a transfer from Guingamp in France. The big DP signing, Yunus Namli, a loan from Krasnodar of the Russian league over there. As well, midfielder, is it Brian?
It's actually pronounced Brian. I don't know.
Is it Brian? Okay.
Yeah, at least from what I've heard, when I've listened to Argentinian media speak of him, they pronounce it Brian. When I meet the player when he arrives in summer or earlier, I might have an update on that. But as far as I'm aware, it's pronounced just Brian.
Okay, sounds good. And then lastly, on the players in, Lalas Abubakar. His loan option to buy was purchased, so he is now officially part of the Rapids. Some of the players out, of course, the led himself, the Secretary of Defense, Tim Howard. He is out. He is retired. Dylan Cerna, Kofi Apare, Tommy Smith, Sam Rabin all had their options declined, and Axel Sjoberg was placed on waivers. So those are the players in, the players out. Personally, I think the players in are much better than the players out, and I'm really excited with these moves that they've made. What are your guys' thoughts?
Well, my thoughts on the roster, this is a multi-year rebuild from the Rapids, as the general manager Porik Smith has often talked about in press conferences and just events with the fans, and even just to media. When he became general manager of the Rapids, there was a lot of there were a lot of like issues contract wise. Like there were a lot of players that were on big money. Tim Howard's one of them. That and Skel Shingashi was another one who was waived before last season. And basically, it arises to this point. The front office has been hammering the gong on 2020 being the year for about ever since 2017. The front office, both Porig and Wayne Brandt, I believe, was the other one who wrote an op-ed in the Denver Post talking about the switch to the Rapids way. And that was after the very poor 2017 season that followed a pretty amazing 2016 season. And so ever since then, it's been rebuild mode. And although they promised playoffs the last 2 years, and I'd argue that they constructed a playoff roster last year despite not making it. Like the talent was there to make the playoffs. They were just the coaching was not there. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more.
Right.
But in terms of these players in, I'm ecstatic, right? Like, so the first thing they did in December, or I think it might have been at the end of November, but shoring up the defense, letting go of Tommy Smith, who was on a very significant TAM contract, but not producing like that value to the team. Like that was a great move. Like they tried to bring him back at a lower price, but it just, they couldn't come to terms. But yeah, bringing in Trusty, great young defender. He's looking like he's going to be the pair with Lalas Abubakar in terms of the central defensive pairing. At least that's what we're seeing in preseason right now. Big fan of Drew Moore, the veteran leadership. He might not get as much play time as the rest of the defense. Like I expect, like we'll talk about the lineup pretty soon, but it's going to be Lawless and Austin, I assume, as the central defensive pairing. Namely and Benazet is great. Love that addition because he's. I think I remembered very fondly the goal he scored against Atlanta. In the playoffs.
Is that because it was against Atlanta, or is it that
it was just because it was an amazing goal, and I was watching I watched all the playoff games, and that's one that was a moment that stuck out to me more than almost any other goal scored during the playoffs, other than the goals in the final. And Namely, that's a big question mark to me and to a lot of people. I think he could be really good, but okay. So the issue is he was really decent, above average, I'd say, in Eredivisie. Back when he played with Azwol and I am blanking on the second team he played for. But when he moved to the Russian league, that was sort of his big money move, like away from like the country he had played almost his entire career in. And the problem with the Russian league is if you've watched any of it, it is an incredibly boring defensive football. It is like bunker like all the time. And
I've seen a lot of players come out of the Russian league who are highly touted, who are supposed to be big signings, and just kind of flounder once they get either to, say, an American league, MLS, Liga MX, South America, or if they go to like a Big Five league. Like I'm a huge Everton fan in the Premier League, and they signed a couple strikers from the Russian league not too long ago and just were utter failures in the Premier League. And maybe I'm a little biased against that league because of how it impacted my Premier League team. But you're right. It doesn't seem like the game translates. But we'll see how Namely can adjust to being in the MLS with the travel schedule, with just the way we're constructed over the summer and things like that.
Yeah, and the issue from what I've heard from speaking to actually several Americans who have moved to Russia, who I contacted on Twitter, they said that it is not a place for creative players like that. Just create their league is where like creates like your number 10s, your like advanced wingers. It's where they go to die. It's like where their careers go to die. So that's how they like treat it. And if you look at like top goal scoring numbers from the Russian league, they are rarely like amazing. We're talking like the amount of goals that Kai Kamara scored for the Rapids last year would have been in contention for the Golden Boot in Russia.
And now like 12, 15 goals or something like that.
Exactly. And the Rapids were like did score a lot of goals last year. Don't get me wrong, and like that's one of the team's big strengths going into this year is that they only added attacking players. They didn't lose any of their like huge goal scorers that came. Like the Rapids scored the third most goals in MLS last year, tied with 4 other teams. The problem is their defense was terrible, especially during the first 8 games of the season under Anthony Hudson.
Right, and that was something that's a great segue, something that they were able to rectify through the firing of Hudson, bringing in their new coach. It looks like he was able to kind of establish more of that culture, more of, like you said, the Rapids way, and hopefully building on that. They brought in the right players. It looks like it's the right combination. And you spoke to the goals being scored. I think that's something that I look at when I'm judging teams and standings is goal differential. And if you see a team with a good goal differential, you know they're going to be at the top half of the table. Unfortunately, the Rapids had those defensive breakdowns and that they're looking to shore up this upcoming season.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to kind of transition a little bit because we've talked kind of about the main roster moves and with Namely being probably their top designated player, as well as with Brian Galvin. Like, what youngsters do you think are going to make an impact on this next season? Who's going to break out? Who's the name that we need to know?
Sure. So the Rapids have been, as part of the Rapids way, putting an extraordinary emphasis on homegrown players. Huge. Like they've signed, I believe, like 5 or 6 in the last like 3 years. So we have Courtney Ford, who's a defender who had a pretty good season, pretty good time on the pitch, like his first 2 years, and then sort of fell off he got injured last season. And so he was out for the entire year, and he was expected to be, like he was expected to break out last season. Like that was going to be the year where he broke out. So that might be like sort of a dark horse candidate to come back in. I'd say Cole Bassett is definitely the person to watch for. As far as Sam Vines and Andre Shinyashiki, I think they're both of them are pretty much like in the mix for the team already. Like I think they both had really good seasons last year. I don't know if you could call this coming year them breaking out, but Cole Bassett 100% is who I expect to have a great season, because he's been all over Europe training with teams in England and in Germany. There are lots of coaches that have like expressed praise for him outside of the Rapids organization. Everybody seems very high on him, and he will definitely be like the first option off the bench in central midfield for the team all year. Okay. Obviously, Kellen Acosta is going to be your primary box-to-box midfielder. Bassett doesn't really play like a deep-lying playmaker role often. He occasionally played that under Hudson, but we haven't seen it under Frazier yet. Point is, like, while he's not the locked-in starter yet, he's definitely a guy to keep an eye out for as he, with MLS's new schedule, with so many midweek matches, fixture congestion is a huge thing. He's going to get tons of game time. Same would go for Jonathan Lewis, who also isn't a locked-in starter. But yeah, those two in addition to Ford as sort of a dark horse candidate would be who I'd be watching out for this season.
Yeah. What were your impressions of Vines with the U.S. team?
Oh, I thought Vines was fantastic. I think he's exactly what you want in a left back. He doesn't do anything flashy. He's not going to score like screamers after cutting inside, like up the field or something, like in an inverted fullback role if Berhalter still wants to go that route on the left side for some reason. But no, he's just a no-nonsense defender. He's full disclosure, I think it was like 2 years ago, the Rapids played a friendly against Boca Juniors at Dick's Sporting Goods Park. And that was one of his first matches, like with the Rapids, because he was on loan for most of that season with Charlotte. Okay. So that was the first time we got a real good look at him 2 years ago. And I forget the name of I think it was Pavon, actually. He was going up against Pavon from Argentina's right flank and shut him down the whole game. Just kept him under wraps the whole match. And the second one I remember very fondly is like the moment where I thought he really elevated his gameplay, to borrow one of our front office's favorite taglines, elevate.
Right. We've had a couple of good Rapids puns so far. We can keep those coming.
Sure thing. No, he really elevated his gameplay against LAFC when he faced Carlos Vela, so much that Vela was forced to switch sides in the middle of the game because he could not get anything done when he was attacking Vines on his right, Vines' left side. So I am like in terms of a defender, he's exactly what you need for it. Now he's not going to be like the guy who's bombing down the pitch, making overlapping runs in the box. None of that.
Mhm.
He's just a no nonsense, like just classic defender. And that works really well for what Robin Fraser and the Rapids are trying to do.
So, Mike, I know you've looked at a little bit more in depth of the roster. Obviously, Joseph, this is what you live for. So, Mike, what's your projected starting 11 from Colorado? And then, Joseph, we can get some of your comments as to what you would maybe expect to see or what you might want to do.
Yeah, so I actually the way that I'm going through these previews, as I've mentioned before, is to just go to the last game that this team played and use that formation. So going back on MLSsoccer.com, the last game of the season, which unfortunately was not a good game for the Rapids,
That's true.
4-2-3-1. So that's kind of the lineup that I went with in my prediction, projected 11 there. I think in goal, I think I got to go with Clint Irwin. I don't know, as far as the backups that they have, I think Clint Irwin will win that job and be the number one there. Left back, obviously Sam Vines, as we were just talking about. Center backs, Trusty and Abubakar, and then Keegan Rosenberry on the outside there. The two backs, if they go this 4-2-3-1, I think Price and Acosta in those two spots. Then on the wings, you've got Benazet and Lewis, with Namely in the middle, kind of as that like number 10. And then up front, I got Kamara up front, but I know, the Shinashiki takeover there, is Rubio the guy there. It's kind of an open play at that position. So those are kind of where I'm thinking. What are you thinking, Joseph?
Okay, so I really like a lot of what you're saying. I would make I think 4 notes. The first note I would make is that Fraser, in terms of the interviews he's been having with like The Athletic in particular, is the one I'm referencing here. He's basically committing to a 4-3-3. Now practically that's gonna look a lot like the 4-2-3-1. But the big distinction there that I just want to be clear on is that like the 3 midfielders, you sort of have 3 different roles there. You have the defensive midfielder, which is going to be, or deep lying playmaker, which is going to be Jack Price. He's going to be the midfield fulcrum in the Rapids' possession. And then you have Acosta, who's your classic box-to-box guy. You're going to see him do defensive work. You're going to see him push into the box. One of the reasons he came to the Rapids was because the staff offered him basically that role, like his original sort of, because he was being pigeonholed as a defensive midfielder at FC Dallas. And he, and also occasionally being left out of the lineup altogether. And one of the reasons why he came here is because he wanted to, stake a claim for that box-to-box role. So that's how I expect him to fill out. And Namely is absolutely expected to be the number 10. As far as goalkeepers go, Irwin is expected to win the starting job. The club said to media a couple months ago that he is like the one they're committing to for number 1. It's why they brought him in to back up Tim Howard last year, is because they wanted him to get some time under his wing. And also he wasn't getting any game time at TFC. Irwin, also a former Rapid that went to TFC and has now returned. Andre Rawls is his immediate backup. He's expected to be the number 2 in goal, and he doesn't have very much MLS experience. So that's why they're looking at him as like the number 2. They do not have a third goalkeeper on the roster, but they have a academy goalkeeper in training by the name of Abraham Rodriguez. He will not break out this year because he's definitely, if he gets signed, which I assume he will, because he's the only third goalkeeper on the preseason roster. If he gets signed, he'll definitely go on loan to Colorado Springs all year. So it'll depend. So he won't break out this season, but he's very much expected among the Colorado fan base to be the ultimate heir to the goalkeeper role, like because they see a lot of promise in him. Just a very good shot stopper. He saved 2 penalties in USL last year. When
it's a good way to get noticed.
Yeah, exactly. And even though he's a bit shorter than I'd like in a goalkeeper, I think he's like 5'8", 5'9", or no, it's a little bit higher. It's like he's in the upper 5 foot range. Sure. And
we'll just ask Nick Romando about short goalkeepers.
Exactly. I mean, Colorado fans know we've been screwed by Nick Romando more times than we can count. So yeah, we know that Abe Rodriguez could be a really good talent, and that's who we expect to be the third As far as the wingers go, I still expect Nicholson to be the right winger of choice over Lewis, and that's because even though Lewis had a better goal and assist ratio throughout the year, both Connor Casey, who was the interim after Hudson left, and Robin Fraser both preferred Nicholson more often. And I think one of the reasons is because he tracks back so much. He offers a lot for the defensive side of the ball, whereas Lewis, it's fine. They're different players and they offer different things. But that's why Lewis was sort of used as a super sub for most of last year. He did make a few starts, and I expect him to make quite a few starts this year as well. But going into the season, I'd expect Nicholson to be the guy on the right. The biggest problem with him, of course, and I've written about it before, is his finishing. He can do he's beautiful, crazy fast player, beautiful on the ball, like crazy technical, but cannot put it in the back of the net. And if he can do that this year, like it'll be his position. Like if he can start scoring goals, like it'll be huge for the Rapids, because he generates a lot of opportunities. A lot of them go to waste.
Sure. So breaking all that down, like if we think Colorado is going to achieve their ceiling, Mike and I are looking at them finishing probably around 4th in the West. Like if that's where we think their top is going to be, that's where they max out. So for them to do that, who's the most important player? And do you agree that that's kind of where they can max out?
Well, I saw in your notes, I think you guys think that Namley's the most important player. I agree with you in terms of reaching the ceiling. I think without Namley, the Rapids are still a playoff team, if that makes sense. Like I think it would be a huge hole if they lost him, because the only other the immediate natural 10 replacement would be either Mosqueda or Rubio as sort of a shadow striker. Which is very common last season. Rubio sort of slotting in right behind Kai Kamara and not really playing as a number 10, playing more as like I said, a second striker. But so the loss of Namley wouldn't be heartbreaking in so far as I think the team would still be good, but I think it would impact their ceiling. So I think I could see the Rapids bold, but I could see them finishing as best case scenario as high as 3rd. I think the West is getting a little bit weaker this season. LAFC is really good. Seattle will always be hard to contend with. But what I come back to is the fact that the Rapids were scoring buckets of goals with a worse attack last year, and were conceding loads of goals with a worse defense, and still were 2 results away from making the playoffs on the final day of the season. I mean, that is remarkable to me that a team could start out winless in their first 8 or 9 matches and still be in contention on the final day. And that really screams to me like how good this roster is. And the fact that they didn't lose any of the major players last year gives me like a lot to be optimistic about. As far as their floor goes, like we discussed this a bit over Twitter DMs. I think the floor of this team is a playoff team. Like I would be pretty like I think a substantial like circumstance would have to happen for the Rapids to not make the playoffs this year, because of all the talent that's there. There would have to be a dramatic implosion, and obviously like soccer, you never know what's going to happen, and on any day any team can win. But the way I look at this team, it is a strong roster. They've got a really quality coach, I feel, in Robin Fraser. Like he really knows. Yeah, I feel Robin Fraser really knows what he's doing, and I think he proved that when he came in and won 5 out of 7 games when he coached the Rapids. So
now, Mike, you're not as optimistic about the Colorado Rapids, and maybe that's because you're living over here in your Eastern Conference, Toronto FC, Reds land, or anything like that. Mike, why do you have a different take on the Rapids season?
Yeah, I think that they could fall a little bit further than 8th, just based off of how I disagree with you as far as the West, kind of going down. I think it's getting better. Sure. I think that you've got a few teams there. Obviously, you've got LAFC and Seattle that you mentioned, but you got the Galaxy, who have really underperformed over the last couple of years with the talent that they have. Minnesota was a playoff team last year. Yeah, they lost some pieces, that they still have a good core. You've got FC Dallas, you've got Houston, you've got a lot of good teams. Houston's offense looks just crazy sick right now. So I think the West can shape out any which way. I've got them as their floor being 10th. But that's just kind of where I agree with you from your standpoint. I can see why you're thinking that they're definitely a playoff team. That amount of talent, that starting 11, and they have depth. They still have guys like Mosqueda, Rubio, to come in those forward/winger positions. So I
And
mean,
we
they
haven't
have
even
the depth there
mentioned,
as well.
and I've only just offhandedly mentioned Andre Shinyashiki, the rookie of the year from last season.
Right.
Oh
He's
yeah.
only
Exactly.
going to have a
Exactly.
harder challenge in 2020 as he deals with, the addition of Benezet and ultimately Galvin, who's going to come in on the wings as well.
Right.
And like it's going to be a cutthroat competition in the Rapids attack, which I always see as a really good indicator that a team is going to be good. If they've got
Yeah.
2 to 3 deep in each attacking position, that just tells me that those players are going to be gunning to get on the field, especially guys like Andre, who's definitely due for or definitely likely to take less minutes this year overall. I still think he's a long-term asset that the Rapids plan on on having around at the club. Like he's spent most of his time in America in the state of Colorado. He went to DU just down the road and was with the Rapids PDL U23 PDL team for I believe two seasons back when the Rapids used to have one. So he's a Colorado local. He'll be around for a while, but I mean, it's hard to see where he's going to get like a lot of time, especially considering how deep the Rapids are on the wings and at striker. Like they're 3 deep at each of those positions. Like the only position I'd mark as like being a little bit questionable is the number 10 role. But even then, Mosqueda, he's good. He's not amazing, but he does he generates a lot of key passes. When I look at the stats, like he generates opportunities for players. And I think that's this sort of shift of the Rapids going from this old school bunker counter team under Pablo Mastreni back in 2016 to now a possession oriented side under Anthony Hudson, then Connor Casey, and now Robin Fraser. I think it's been a really solid evolution by the front office. The biggest thing for the Rapids is that they aren't going to drop millions of dollars on salary. And that's always going to keep them a little bit out of the minds of a lot of people. I feel like when you don't have like that huge big name player on your team, like you don't have a Chicharito, you don't have a Lodero or an Almiron or Pity Martinez or whatever. It's always going to keep people a little bit skeptical, but we'll see if Namely can do that. Like there are a lot of people who are hyping him up a lot, quite a bit. I'm not too sold he'll be the best. Like I think somebody in the Athletics said he was the only person with a better left foot in the league was Carlos Vela, and I feel like that's a pretty bold claim to make to me. Like for a guy who hasn't played a minute in the league. But like the guy seems to have talent. He's very skillful, and I mean we'll see. We'll see if he can become that big like star for the Rapids, despite not being an extraordinarily high-paying player.
Well, the Rapids' first test.
Only time will tell.
Yeah, it's true. Only time will tell.
Well, the Rapids' first test is February 29th over at DC United, so we'll see how they fare in that kind of cross-country away game.
I'll be there.
Hey, all right.
Nice.
So, did you get to travel with the team, or is this just kind of on your own hobby now?
Well, so sometimes I'll go to. Usually when I go to games, I stay in my season ticket holder seats. But like, for example, I'm going to one of the preseason games in about 2 weeks. For that one, I will be like covering in a proper press box environment. But because I'm going with my wife and a few friends to the game in DC, I'll pretty much stick in the stands for most of the match. But yeah,
okay. Last question for you. Last Rapids question for you here. How many hairstyles do we see from Shinyashiki this year?
Oh man!
Do we set the over/under at like 4.5? Is that too much?
Cole Bassett arrived to training camp with the same bleach blonde hair, so they're all going to like some guy who's like bleaching them all the time. So I don't know, like I haven't talked to Andre about like why he changes his hair, but I mean more power to him, I guess. Like it's pretty fun seeing like the different combinations that they show up on the pitch. I wasn't a big fan of Acosta bleaching his hair for there was a 3-week period where his hair was like bleach blonde, and
we did double takes when we were watching Rapids games.
Sure. Yeah. But yeah, like I think, I mean, I don't know how many we'll see. I would, if you're putting the over under at 4, I would take the under on that, and I would expect it to be around 3. But we'll never know. He could show up. He could show up a different week with a different cut. So we'll see.
There you go. And then add in the mustache for increased variables and styles and things. Well, Joseph, thank you so much for your time. Can you let our listeners know where they can find you online, on Twitter, and how they can get in touch with you?
I'm at Twitter at JSPSam, and my blog is at Rapids Republic on Twitter, and we're also at rapidsrepublic.com if you'd like to read more. It's me, Juan Fernandez, who's a capo over at C38, and Kellen Abreu, who's just another Rapids fan here. All three of us are just writing about the Rapids whenever we get the chance. If you're interested in reading about a small market team in MLS outside of being a fan in Colorado, feel free to drop on by and share with me your thoughts. I've talked to basically pretty much anybody who is willing to broach the subject of soccer with me. So you want to talk about the Rapids, you want to talk about MLS, I'm game for it whenever you are.
Awesome. Mike, anything else that you want to say?
No, thanks a lot for joining us, Joseph, and really appreciate you coming on. Fans, check it out on YouTube. Make sure you hit like and subscribe down below.
Thank you guys so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure to talk with you about MLS, and feel free to have me back at any time if you want to talk about the Rapids even more. Talk to y'all later, right?
Absolutely. Come playoff time at the very least, right?
Absolutely. Yes, if they're in, which I'm expecting it. I'll be happy to give you a breakdown on how they've been playing up to that point.
Excellent. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Joseph.
All right, thank you.
All right, we are back with our next season preview for 2020, the New York Red Bulls. Lots of movement for the New York Red Bulls. This is going to be a very different looking team. Lots of big names out. Some players in. We'll start with them first. We've got goalkeeper Kendall McIntosh through the re-entry draft, midfielder Jared Stroud, and midfielder Chris Lima, I believe that's how it's pronounced, from the USL Championship. They've got a homegrown signing, John Tolkien. Midfielder Josh Sims, their designated player, the loan from Southampton, is back. He had a little brief loan stint with them in towards the end of last season, and now is back for another short loan stint. We'll get more into that later on. Also, goalkeeper David Jensen, a transfer from FC Utrecht, and defender Mandela Egbo from SV Darmstadt 98. So those are the players in for the Red Bulls. Players out, we've got defender Connor Lade, who retired. The big names now. Luis Robles, the goalkeeper for New York Red Bulls, who was just a goalkeeper for years and years and years. Really a stalwart at the back for the Red Bulls. He has moved on. His option was declined. Bradley Wright Phillips, yes, BWP, is also moving on out of contract. Vincent Bezecourt, Marcus Epps, Derek Etienne Jr., Jan-Christoph Kofi all had their options declined, as well as goalkeeper Evan Laurel. Defenders, Michael Murillo was transferred to Anderlecht, and Kamar Lawrence was also just transferred. So a lot of big names are now gone from the Red Bulls. Nick, what do we think we're going to see out of the Red Bulls? I think with all these big names, the stalwarts of those teams are now gone.
Yeah, I was really shocked to see Etienne Jr.'s option get declined. I'm trying to kind of see if he got picked up anywhere else, which I fully anticipate he will be by the start of the season, or at the very least at the summer transfer window. I imagine if there's a team who's got a guy that goes down with injury, or if they're just looking to kind of bolster some depth or something, that he'll get picked up. I mean, he played pretty well for the Red Bulls over the last few seasons. He's a Haitian international, so he's got international CONCACAF experience. I just think he's someone who has the requisite skill set and MLS resume where he shouldn't be out of work for too long. I don't know if he has talent enough, or if his agent is pushing him to leagues overseas. But he's someone who's got a good soccer pedigree, a good MLS resume, and I imagine that he won't be unemployed for too long. So that was kind of the one thing that really jumped out to me regarding the players out. Obviously, Kamar Lawrence is a huge loss for the Red Bulls. There have been articles recently about saying, well, where does he fit in MLS history as far as defenders go, as far as, I think he was a left back, like as far as left backs go, like he's one of the all-time greats. He's played for these extremely well-performing Red Bulls teams. Like, that's the kind of impact player that the Red Bulls just lost. Like, people are talking about him as an all-time MLS great. He is off to RSC Anderlecht in the Belgian league, so good for him. It wouldn't surprise me if he can have a really solid career in Belgium, or maybe play for 2 or 3 years, get a little better, and then make the jump to an even bigger league. I think that's the kind of talent we've seen with Kamar Lawrence, as well as the kind of just sheer determination that he's been able to put into crafting his game. So those are kind of the two things that really stood out to me. You know, we said it with our Colorado preview. The ins far outweigh the outs, and Colorado is poised to have a really good season. Whereas you look at the Red Bulls, the players they lost, I don't know if they've been able to replace guys such as Lawrence, BWP, Bezecourt, Etienne Jr., even though he was more of a depth piece. Like, I don't know if the Red Bulls have been able to bolster their roster enough to really compete in the Eastern Conference again, Mike.
Yeah, and we'll discuss that, further here in the next portions of our preview. One note that I do want to speak on, though, as far as Derek Etienne Jr., remember last year he was loaned out to FC Cincinnati for the end of the season there with Cincinnati. So, it was clear at that point he wasn't part of the future for the Red Bulls. But as you say, he probably should get picked up. It might even be through Cincinnati. Maybe another club in MLS will give him a look. As far as the designated players go, I think this is kind of the spot that really needs some attention for the Red Bulls. They've got, of course, Kaku is their probably their biggest name DP. Only had 5 goals and 6 assists last year. That's a big drop from his first season where he had 14 assists. Not a good season last season for Kaku. I know he had a couple injuries, nothing big long term, but a couple injuries. He had that incident in Sporting Kansas City where he kicked the ball into the stands. So it's kind of a rough year for him overall. They need him to bounce back. The second designated player, Josh Sims. As I mentioned earlier, it was a 6-month loan last season from Southampton. Came over, played the end of the season with the Red Bulls, then moved. Technically went back. The loan was over, went back to Southampton. Now he's back again on another 6-month loan that expires on June 30th of this year. He's considered a young designated player. Looks like he has some good talent. Didn't really do much towards the end of last season for him. He did score in the playoff game, or had a couple assists in that playoff game against Philadelphia. He's shown flashes, but my biggest question on this is this really the right approach? You're talking about a designated player on your team, and I know the Red Bulls do things differently. That there's no question about that. Is this the right approach? You have one of your best players on your club that comes in for 6 months, then goes back, then comes in for another 6 months. Are we going to buy him? They're really non-committal, and I think that is very concerning. Then, of course, there's the third spot that's open. Really not a lot of rumors out there. There's a couple things floating around, but nothing crazy. Are they going to sign anybody as far as that goes? So, Nick, what are your thoughts on at least on Josh Sims and possibly that third overall spot?
I mean, I don't have too much more to add as far as that, but as far as that third overall spot goes, they need a striker. Because looking at their roster and looking at what happened to that team when Bradley Wright Phillips was out of their starting lineup, where are the goals going to come from? Like, they need to add offense. And it's crazy to think that in today's age of soccer reporting and tabloid coverage and all this ridiculous rumor mills that are out there, like, there's been really nothing about the Red Bulls signing anybody. Just to kind of put some perspective, the Red Bulls last year had 53 goals for. That was the third worst amongst Eastern Conference playoff teams. And actually, the Chicago Fire had more goals scored, and they didn't make the playoffs in the Eastern Conference. So 53 goals is not a lot. And if you want to look at your Western Conference teams, obviously you had LAFC with 85 goals for. That was just an insane season for them. But you had the Galaxy with 58, You had Dallas with 54. The Rapids had 58 goals, who missed the playoffs. But the Western Conference playoff teams were, anywhere between 46 and 54 goals. So you didn't see as much scoring with the meat of the Western Conference, but in the Eastern Conference, they're definitely lacking that goal scoring ability. And again, only having a differential of 2 goals, they need offense. If that's one metric I'm looking at, and you take away Bradley Wright Phillips, how many goals did he have for them over the last season, even as almost a part-time player due to his injuries? They're really going to be missing out on offense. Then you want to go back on the flip side. There's all these rumors about Aaron Long going to the Premier League, that he was being scouted by West Ham, who one of West Ham's defenders is, I think, going to be out on loan to Nashville. So they're thinking, okay, well, one of our defenders is going to Nashville. We bring in Aaron Long to fill that spot. Well, man, you lose BWP, you lose Kamar Lawrence, you lose Aaron Long, maybe. I mean, where do the Red Bulls start to address their roster holes? Their defense is a shell of itself as far as players lost, and their offense is not anywhere near where it needs to be to compete in the Eastern Conference. So I don't even know where the Red Bulls are going to do anything, especially the fact that we haven't heard much from their front office. We know they do things a little differently, like you said. I mean, fans are going to be clamoring for Chris Armas's head even more so than they already are. It's going to be a rough season if you're a Red Bulls fan. That's my take, just as far as a roster goes.
So I've got 2 trains of thought on the Aaron Long thing, which it hasn't happened as of yet. I don't even know if it's going to happen now that the transfer window's kind of closed, that main transfer window, right? Two pieces there. One is, as you touched on, can they have any more holes? That's number one. They're kind of stuck. They can't let this guy go from that standpoint. And as well, I think they kind of got burned a little bit with Matt Mazaga when he got transferred over to Chelsea back a couple of years ago. Mazaga hasn't panned out over there. And
Miazga?
I think they might be Miazga.
That's okay. Since when do we pronounce some names right on this show?
Exactly. We're an American soccer podcast. Pronunciation is not the number one thing we do. So my thought is though that maybe they're sitting back and saying let's keep this guy here for that longer approach, right? He's already broken into the first team. He's there. We've kind of talked about the Alphonso Davies approach, right, with Vancouver, then going to Bayern Munich, and that he didn't get sold off right away. Aaron Long is not in that same boat. He did not get sold off right away. He's broken into the lineup. He's been a number 1 center back for them for a while now. But I think they might just be saying, hey, the longer he stays here, the better off he's going to be in that development plan, so we don't have another issue like Miazga. So I don't know. That could be some thought process there. But I agree, Nick. There's a lot of holes to fill for the Red Bulls. It's got to be a matter of time. I mean, this team does do a great job. Their defense is good. They play that high press. That's what they're known for. They're not going to be a crazy offensive team. But as far as the offense goes, I think what I noticed was, especially from Reddit, I got some good information on Reddit about the breakout youngsters, and one that I didn't put on the breakout youngster list was Brian White, the striker forward there. I think he's probably going to be that number 1. He had a good end of the season last year. As far as goals went, he had 17 games started, 19 appearances, and had 9 goals and 2 assists on 29 shots, 12 shots on goal. So 12 shots on goal and 9 goals is a pretty good percentage there. So I think they're expecting big things out of him. He's kind of young. He's going to do some big things there. So hopefully for their sake and the way that they play with that lone striker up top, if they continue to go that route, which I assume Armas will, maybe he is the guy that can fill in. But then they've got other young depth as well. But they could definitely bring some players in there to help out. So speaking of those breakout youngsters, the the few breakout youngsters that we got there, we had some good conversations on Reddit, was Omir Fernandez, a 20-year-old midfielder / right wing, 18 appearances last season, 2 goals and 2 assists. He's right there as far as on the cusp to break out. I think as long as he gets the minutes, he's going to be okay, and he'll probably show up and do some damage on the offensive side. The second is John Tolkien, the 17-year-old left back. He's in a battle. Their MLS Super Draft pick from just a few weeks ago. So he's in a battle there with him. People are leaning towards Seagrass to take that job since they moved up and spent that $100K in GAM. But this is a kid who could end up taking that spot and break out. He just signed to a homegrown deal. He might be able to get a chance to prove himself. But he's going to get minutes either way, because I don't think Seagrass is going to come in as a draft pick right off the bat and play 34 games plus Open Cup games and just be, a beast back there. Not after coming out of college where they play 12 games in a season. So those are the two that I've got there, the breakout youngsters. Nick, would you have any thoughts on these guys?
Well, I wouldn't say so much about their specific talent, and I think maybe this is the one thing that can save the Red Bulls from an embarrassing season is they are a system team, not as much as a talent team. Now, of course, every team has their system, every team has their tactics, formations, how they want to play, but the Red Bulls are that high press, quick counter attacking team. They've got that system. They develop players in their academy, in their affiliates to fit that system. So with these young guys that could break out, with other players that they bring in or guys on their rosters who haven't had much experience in the past who are now going to get that time with, as we said, some of the guys on the way out, if they can continue to play their system the way that they have been, then maybe they can have a respectable season and make the playoffs again. But I don't see – I mean, we talked about some of these breakout young guys, Tolkien and possibly Duncan, I think you mentioned in some of your notes. Those are defenders. I don't know how they're going to affect the goal scoring that is so needed in the Eastern Conference. If White can break out, then maybe he does replace BWP adequately. But it's a lot to ask in one season. It's a lot to ask in that turnaround. It's a lot to ask when you have roster turnaround, when you have a coach on the hot seat, when you have a fan base. Oh my God, can you imagine being a Red Bull fan? All the heartache that you've endured to this date, only to find that your roster looks the way it does at this point in the preseason. Oh man, it's the New York market on top of it. All of that is working against the Red Bulls right now. And I'm just not optimistic about it. I think they typically outplay their talent and typically do a good job of locking down opposing teams' best players. But I just don't know if they're going to be able to do that again this season. So that's kind of my overarching take on the status of the Red Bull roster and kind of looking for what they're going to do as we approach the opening of the season. So again, as far as the youngsters, they are what they are. As far as the guys on the roster, they are what they are. We know what we're going to get. I would disagree with you that Aaron Long needs some more development time. I mean, the guy's fighting for a starting spot on the national team right now. So I think he's doing pretty well as far as his development within the MLS and as his own personal player. It wouldn't surprise me if he does get moved to a bigger league internationally, to a European league, especially because we know the Red Bulls like to sell and make some money back on their investments. So that's kind of my top to bottom take of it all, Mike. I know you're ready to dive into your projected starting 11 and see if they can put together a decent roster on paper here.
Yeah, so speaking of that projected 11, going from their last game last season, that formation, the 4-2-3-1, I've got the new signing from Utrecht, David Jensen in goal. Left back, I've got Seagrass winning that position, as I alluded to earlier with the breakout youngsters talking about Tolkien. I've got Seagrass there, Aaron Long, Parker, and Egbo to round out the back line. Rezetkowski, I don't even know how to pronounce that dude's name. And again, pronunciation, not our strong suit. Rekowski,
Just Redkowski.
and Caceres Jr.
Get the Z, it's silent.
There you go. Yeah, okay. Caceres Jr., then the three kind of up-front wingers. I've got Danny Royer, Kaku, and Josh Sims. And up front, as I alluded to earlier, Brian White, I think he'll win that starting job. So that's kind of the starting 11 right now. I think that's a decent starting 11. I'm not going to say it's great. I'm not going to say it's a good even. I think it's an okay starting 11. What scares the hell out of me is if Kaku goes down with an injury, or Sims doesn't pan out with his loan or gets recalled back, or Danny Royer is getting older now, suffers an injury. I mean, if they're like one spot away from really just it being really dangerous. They just don't have a ton of depth. They have a lot of young guys in the system to kind of fill in. They got Alex Mule, who I didn't add into the list here. I think he's good, a good player as far as depth goes. But other than that, there's not a ton of depth. So that's kind of my thoughts on the starting 11. Nick, what thoughts do you have with that starting 11? Do you agree, disagree, and who would be your most important player for the Red Bulls?
I mean, looking at what you got on paper, it's hard to disagree at this point. You're right. Mule has been a really solid piece for them over the last season at least. So he could easily break into that starting lineup at some point there. But it looks like they're just going to need anyone who's on the field to step up and play that much better than they did last year to kind of make up for some of the roster holes. As far as the most important player, it's got to be Kaku. He needs to get back to his form from 2018. If he doesn't, it wouldn't surprise me if the Red Bulls miss the playoffs and kind of tank for the year. He has to be the creative mastermind. He has to coordinate the lines where they're. Excuse me, I kind of stumbled over that myself. He's the captain, and he's got to be the coach on the field too. And if he's not the captain, then he's got to be the coach on the field. Maybe Aaron Long ends up wearing the captain's armband. But he's got to score goals. He's got to create chances. He's got to press. Like if he gets lazy on defense, which I think has happened a couple times in the past, then the whole high press breaks down. You've got to have everyone pressing and putting pressure on the ball and the men off the ball who are trying to check to for a pass. If he's not pressing, then that leaves the Red Bulls exposed. So he's got to play better defense. He's got to play the press better, and then he's got to be able to flip it and get back into offense. You note that the Red Bulls haven't done much with any offseason signings, and we talked about that earlier. So without those extra signings coming in to bolster a younger roster, he's got to play well. Kaku's got to be their best player. You're right, shaking your head. Do you agree with me on that, or what?
I do. I agree. Kaku is their biggest name. He's a designated player. He has to rebound back to that that 2018 form. If he doesn't, it's going to speak a lot of trouble. 5 goals and 6 assists. If he does what he did last year, it's not going to work. He has to be a distributor up front and to the wings, get Royer some goals, get Sims into the offense a little bit more than he was the end of the last season, as well as if you got a bunch of young kids up front, like Jorgensen, like White, these guys need some service. So definitely looking to get that out of him. Now, looking at the predictions, Nick, what do you think as far as predictions for this team? I think a ceiling for this team is where everything goes right. They pick up probably a third DP in the summertime, and they find their way into the playoffs, maybe a 6. Floor, I think the East almost at the bottom, but I'm sure there will be somebody worse than Bulls. That's if everything just kind of falls apart for them. So that's the ceiling and the floor that I have for the Red Bulls.
So, yeah, it looks like your best case scenario is where they ended up last year as the 6th seed in the Eastern Conference, having that away game, having to travel and try and make something happen on the road. Man, looking at the East, we all know how good New York, Atlanta are. We know how much better Philly, New England have gotten. And again, based on how their current roster makeup is, I don't see them competing with those teams. Hey, maybe they catch lightning in a bottle. Maybe it's a magical season, and these players just continually outperform their expectations. That being said, yeah, I think a 5 or 6 seed is probably very optimistic on the high end of things, and the floor. Again, if everything just bottoms out, if Armas gets let go mid-season, Aaron Long gets sold, Kaku gets hurt, and everything just falls out, yeah, you're looking at bottom 2 or 3 in the East. That's kind of my take on it.
All right, well, the first game for the Red Bulls is on March 1st, hosting FC Cincinnati. So, Cincinnati's done some things this year, this offseason. They picked up a few guys, but that's a team that was the worst team in the league last season, and they're coming to New Jersey to play at Red Bull Arena. A good chance for the Red Bulls to get off on the right foot.
Agreed. Cincinnati's got nowhere to go but up, and the Red Bulls have to show that they can stay up. So, excellent test to start the season for the Red Bulls there. With that, we are going to transition into the next segment